May 18, 2024, John F. Kennedy International Airport, New York. A 23-year-old man walks through customs like anyone else stepping off an international flight. Passport, declaration form, the ordinary friction of coming home. Except federal agents are already waiting for him. Here's the detail that makes this story different from almost every dark web bust you've heard of. The man being arrested wasn't hiding in a basement somewhere, paranoid and off the grid. He had a day job, a legitimate one, on a government payroll, on a small island thousands of miles from that airport. Sit with that for a second. Weeks before federal agents put him in handcuffs, this same man had stood in front of a room full of real police officers, teaching them how to catch cyber criminals. That's not irony. That's the entire shape of this case. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly how a 20-year-old built one of the largest narcotics operations on the internet while hiding in plain sight, right up until the moment his own greed exposed him. Let's start with the human cost, because it's easy to talk about dark web marketplaces in abstractions. Dollar figures, transaction counts, kilograms. It's harder, and more important, to remember what those numbers actually represent. On September 13, 2022, a 27-year-old resident of Arkansas took what they believed was oxycodone, a prescription painkiller, something with a known, predictable effect. What they had actually purchased, prosecutors would later establish, was a counterfeit pill bought through Incognito Market, pressed to look exactly like pharmaceutical oxycodone, but laced with fentanyl instead. They did not wake up the next day. We don't know this person's name. It was never made public in connection with this case. But federal prosecutors would later stand in front of a courtroom and describe their death as one of the direct, documented consequences of the marketplace at the center of the story. A marketplace that, by the government's own accounting, caused harm to more than 470,000 narcotics users and their families. That is not a small number. That is a small city's worth of people whose lives intersected, in some way, with a website run by one young man from a laptop. That man was Rui-Siang Lin, a Taiwanese national in his early 20s when this story begins. Remember that day job we mentioned at the top of this episode? Here's the full picture. Lin worked as an assistant technician for the government of Taiwan, stationed in St. Lucia, a small island nation in the Eastern Caribbean. And he didn't hold that job quietly. He posted about it on social media, including at one point leading a 4-day training session for local St. Lucian police officers on the exact subject that would eventually end his freedom: cybercrime and cryptocurrency investigation. That brings us to the part of Lin's life he wasn't posting about. Starting in October 2020, using the online alias Pharaoh, Lin built and operated Incognito Market, a narcotics marketplace hidden on the dark web, accessible only through the Tor browser, designed from the ground up to let buyers and sellers of illegal drugs transact with something close to anonymity. He didn't build a crude operation. He built something that functioned in almost every visible way, like a legitimate e-commerce platform. Vendor storefronts, customer reviews, dispute resolution. He even built Incognito's own internal banking system, a proprietary cryptocurrency wallet infrastructure, the site called Incognito Bank, where users could deposit funds ahead of time and spend them like a store credit balance. Vendors paid to get listed. Then they paid Lin a 5% commission on every single sale. Over roughly 4 years, that commission structure alone put an estimated $6 million directly into Lin's own accounts. Now let's talk about how the operation actually grew, because this is where the story stops being about one man's clever software and starts being about the specific, deadly category of product he chose to let onto his platform. In January 2022, Lin opened the marketplace up to opiate listings. That single decision changed everything about what Incognito Market was. Cocaine and methamphetamine are dangerous. Counterfeit prescription opioids laced with fentanyl are something else entirely. a product where a single miscalculated dose, hidden inside a pill that looks exactly like medicine, can kill someone in minutes. By the time federal investigators had finished building their case, Incognito Market had moved more than 1,000 kilograms each of cocaine and methamphetamine, hundreds of kilograms of other narcotics, and more than 4 kilograms of counterfeit oxycodone, the exact category of product that would be tied to a death in Arkansas, and, separately, to the moment federal law enforcement finally confirmed what they'd suspected all along. That brings us to the investigation. The FBI had been watching Incognito Market since 2022, using undercover purchases to build a paper trail against the marketplace's most dangerous listings. In November 2023, an undercover agent bought pills advertised as oxycodone directly from the site. Those pills tested positive for fentanyl. Think about that for a moment. By November 2023, federal investigators had direct, laboratory-confirmed proof that Incognito Market was actively facilitating the sale of fentanyl-laced counterfeit pills to anyone with a Tor browser and cryptocurrency. The marketplace didn't slow down. It kept operating for another 4 months. Search warrants followed in July and August of 2023. And behind the scenes, investigators were quietly building the piece of evidence that would ultimately end Rui-Siang Lin's freedom: the domain registration records for Incognito Market itself. Records that, astonishingly, contained his real name, his real phone number, and his real address. That's not a small thing. Ross Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road, was undone in 2013 by a single reused forum username tied to his real Gmail account. More than a decade later, and with an entire cautionary tale publicly available to study, Lin made a strikingly similar mistake: building an anonymous criminal enterprise on top of infrastructure that was never actually anonymous at all. That brings us to March 2024, and to the moment Lin's own operation turned on the very people who'd made him millions. Facing what was likely mounting pressure and risk, Lin decided to shut Incognito Market down. But he didn't just walk away. He executed what's known in dark web circles as an exit scam, stealing at least $1 million directly out of user deposit accounts inside his own Incognito bank system. Vendors and buyers who trusted the platform with their funds simply watched that money disappear. Then, in the marketplace's final days, Lin did something that shocked even people accustomed to dark web criminality. He turned around and tried to extort his own customers. Using his Pharaoh identity, Lin threatened to publish approximately 557,000 order records and roughly 862,000 cryptocurrency transaction hashes, a data set that could expose the identity and buying history of virtually everyone who'd ever used the site, unless individual users paid him anywhere from $100 to $20,000 each to keep their information private. In one message posted to the site during this period, Lin himself acknowledged exactly what he was doing. "Yes, this is extortion," he wrote. Now read that again. A man who had spent nearly 4 years building an operation designed around anonymity and trust, however illegal that trust may have been, ended it by threatening to expose his own users' identities for cash. It is difficult to imagine a more complete betrayal of the very customer base that had made him a millionaire. Rui-Siang Lin was arrested May 18, 2024, at JFK International Airport and arraigned 2 days later in Manhattan Federal Court. He was charged with engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, a charge carrying a mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison, along with narcotics conspiracy, money laundering, and conspiracy to distribute adulterated and misbranded medication. On December 16, 2024, Lin pleaded guilty before U.S. District Judge Colleen McMahon to narcotics conspiracy, money laundering, and the adulterated medication conspiracy charge. That brings us to the verdict. On February 3, 2026, Judge McMahon sentenced Rui-Siang Lin to 30 years in federal prison followed by 5 years of supervised release. The court additionally ordered forfeiture of $105,045,109.67, the full estimated value of the narcotics business Lin had built. At sentencing, Judge McMahon did not mince words. She told Lin that what he had built was, in her words, a business that made him a drug kingpin, and she described the case as the most serious drug crime she had personally confronted in 27.5 years on the bench. U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton was similarly direct in his public statement, saying Lin was responsible for at least one tragic death, and that the sentence sent a message that criminals cannot hide behind decentralization or blockchain technology indefinitely. There's a specific kind of myth that surrounds dark web drug marketplaces. The idea that there's somehow a victimless corner of the internet, a marketplace between consenting adults that exists safely outside the reach of real-world harm. This case is the argument against that myth, laid out in a federal courtroom in exacting detail. A 27-year-old in Arkansas bought what they thought was a prescription painkiller and died within a day. More than 470,000 people, by the government's own accounting, had some documented connection to a marketplace whose founder ultimately turned around and tried to extort them for cash on his way out the door. And the man responsible for all of it had, weeks before his arrest, been standing in front of a room of real police officers, teaching them how to catch people exactly like him. Rui-Siang Lin is 24 years old, and he is going to spend the next 3 decades in federal prison. The forfeiture judgment against him totals more than the entire value of the criminal enterprise he built. Every dollar accounted for, ordered returned to the government that finally caught him. None of that brings back the person who died in Arkansas in September of 2022. None of it undoes 4 years of a marketplace built specifically to make dangerous, sometimes lethal drugs easier to obtain anonymously than they had ever been before. What it does confirm is something worth remembering the next time anyone tells you the dark web is untouchable. It isn't. Not for Ross Ulbricht in 2013. Not for Rui-Siang Lin in 2024. Every layer of anonymity these platforms promise their users is, in the end, only as strong as the one mistake it takes to unravel it. And federal investigators have gotten very, very good at finding that mistake. That mistake ends careers. It should also end the idea that this corner of the internet is somehow consequence-free. If this case stayed with you, subscribe to Sealed Verdict. I will see you in the next verdict, just like this one.